Hello, everyone. This is StrawberryShorty here with the Santa Clauses Season 2, Episode 2. So, a lot happened last episode. Santa wants his family to be more involved. Carol took over the ELFS. Buddy misses his girlfriend. Sandra's powers are proving to be too much for her. And Betty had to go on Cribble Crabble, leaving Noel, but really Edie, in charge. So, with that out of the way, let's just get started. Santa meets with the elves and challenges Noel and Edie's attempts to be professional. Since he wants his family to be more involved, they're at the meeting, with the exception of Sandra. Carol wants to find the missing Nutcracker, and Santa causes concern when he mentions that he wants to find the missing pages of Santa lore, the ones Noel burned near the end of the last episode. It doesn't help when Noel lets the name Magnus Antis slip, hinting that he knows more than he's letting on. Buddy tries on a new vest his father made for him, and Riley, who has apparently been allowed to stay, does her family miss her at all, whistles and seriously hurts the elves? Weird. Sorry if there was a weird pause there. Namely, the recording, I don't think paused. I'm going to try and trim it out, but you know how YouTube is. So, Santa meets with Cupid, who may or may not be the same one from the movies. I honestly never really paid attention. He has come to reveal that the other legendary heroes are unhappy with Scott's choice to make his son the next Santa, especially since he kept them out of the loop with everything that happened in Season 1. Buddy and Riley interrupt, and things get even weirder when Riley gets Cupid all giggly by playing peekaboo with him. I don't know what's up with that. Cupid, it turns out, can't make them fall out of love, even though Scott wants him to. It's also revealed Cupid can't have kids. What's the deal with that? And that he got his wife's attention using 5 arrows. Kind of concerning. He gives Scott 3 months to make his son a suitable successor before they intervene. Scott asks if he knows anything about Magnus Antis, and while Cupid recognizes the name, he claims to have no idea. We get this episode's title, Floofy, and I wonder if it's a reference to Fluffy. Meanwhile, No tries to calm down Edie, who is panicking about Scott's interest in the Mad Santa and the fear that the cycle will be repeated. She's worried that he'll get free and unleash his rage on the world. But we cut to him chilling out and actually having a good time with Fluffy Santa Chris, who is showing him modern technology. And the poor man just really wants a hug, and surprisingly, the Mad Santa eventually consents. But then, suddenly, Olga appears, sans that weird mask she was wearing before, and we learn that she's apparently a gnome and got frozen along with Mad Santa. Back at the North Pole, Carol brings up how weird the elves got when the Nutcracker was mentioned. Scott is more interested in a weird I see you when you're sleeping sweater of his that went missing, that none of them seem to know anything about, and it's pretty clear Carol has some idea, but the subject switches to Sandra. They have no idea what's up with their daughter, which is kind of sad. I mean, she's not exactly confiding in them, but when Scott wants to talk to her, Carol talks him out of it, believing that her issues aren't magical but biological. Sandra goes to see that witch lady, whose full title I've forgotten. She was in the last season. The subs say her name is La Befana. So Sandra confesses her problem to the witch, who thinks that Sandra might actually be one too. The witch says some kind of awful stuff about the girl's appearance becoming ugly, which seems like a bad thing. Is that like a necessary thing for being a witch? And Sandra goes into detail about the spark she shot off, inadvertently showing the witch when she's trying to talk about it. The witch thinks this is bad as it only happens when she's mad. Sandra thinks her parents won't care because her issues aren't Christmas related, and the witch talks her into telling her parents. It's more out of concern for herself, but at least someone in this show is being responsible. Meanwhile, Buddy's attempt to be Santa in a simulation doesn't go well. He's caught stealing cookies from a pregnant woman. Riley compliments him, and it turns out Floofy is her nickname for Buddy. Seriously, what have they done to this girl's character? I don't remember her being like this in season 1. Oh, and one of the elves is also named Floofy. Back in the real world, Fluffy tells his coworker what happened, but of course she doesn't believe him. Olga, meanwhile, turns out to be more filled with rage than Magnus, wanting revenge for what happened to them. He actually seems pretty happy with how things are. What happened to Olga, though? Like, how did she become so twisted? Anyway, I wasn't expecting this turn of events. And do wet cashews actually get soft? Olga mentions this right before she, just up and freaking slaps Magnus. Returning to the North Pole, Sandra doesn't actually tell Scott her problems, and he doesn't ask. She asks to hang out with Lubafana, and he upsets her by being a witch racist. He's okay with Lubafana, but thinks other witches are less good. Gary also seems convinced that Lubafana took the Nutcracker, because apparently he dated the witch 200 years ago, and it didn't end well. Carol admonishes him for this as Sandra arrives, and she tells her daughter that she can always talk to her. Still not being super upfront, Sandra asks for her opinion on Lubafana, and I kind of get this. But Carol's also kind of rude, as while she thinks positively of the woman, she comments that there's nothing but spiders and cobwebs up there, which further upsets Sandra. Seriously, what is with these two? Sandra returns to Lubafana, who teaches her to Wingardium Leviosa a feather. She then does the same to a plant, but accidentally breaks it. Lubafana thinks she's got something on her mind, and Sandra confesses that she didn't tell her parents. Lubafana again urges her to tell them, warning that she must learn to control her powers. And in her following outburst, Sandra lets out another burst of magical energy. We cut to Gary being Gary, and it turns out he didn't get the DNA info Carol asked him to. I'm beginning to see why people don't like him. Scott, meanwhile, thinks that Buddy needs to learn from his predecessors. Edie points out how he only did that a little while ago, making Santa actually miss Betty. I thought we'd be seeing what she was up to by now. Is this just a thing where they, couldn't keep the actor around for long? Anyway, we learn about the supposed utopia that Magnus built, which was around the time Noel met Betty. It was the 12th century, and we see the elves in the past. Betty seems stricken with Noel immediately, and it is a little cute. Anyway, Mad Santa comes along, accompanied by an elf called Toots. Magnus apparently can't even remember his elves' names, though, to be fair, there are probably a lot of them. Anyway, Gary goes to play darts with Edie. Betty warns that Edie is terrible at darts, and I guess we know how he lost that eye of his. We also learned that Bettina and Noel were Betty and Noel's first full names, and that they got married after courting for 200 years. When they got back from their honeymoon, Magnus's reign was over, which is why Noel claims they have no idea what happened. Santa, meanwhile, is still kind of puzzled by the fact that he didn't meet Magnus Antis in the Yuleverse. Meanwhile, back in the real world, the Mad Santa is walking along the museum property with Fluffy and Olga. He thinks this is the real world, and we learn Olga seems to really hate elves. And I mean, this is the real world, but it's the museum's little Christmas land, not how everywhere is. But anyway, back at the North Pole, Scott actually approves of the Mad Santa being the first to close the North Pole to outsiders. He also wants to train Buddy harder, and it becomes clear Noel and Edie are hiding something. Cutting back to the past, we learn that we see Noel approaching Betty, urging her to leave with him before it's too late, mentioning how many of the other named elves from the show are fleeing as well. Ever since Magnus joined with the gnomes, he's apparently changed. Betty resists this, wanting to fight for Christmas instead of running away. Magnus overhears and is angry, having Olga drag the two of them off. After that, there is a missed chance for an Iron Throne joke before we return to the museum. A little boy calls out Mad Santa as a fake and says that he wants Roblox. I thought that was a PC game. Is it not a PC game? Fluffy confirms that it actually is, and reveals people aren't always grateful for simple gifts. Magnus asks what more they could want when they have actual miracles in their hands, and to be fair, he's not wrong. Fluffy also agrees, stating how they try to give people an escape from it all, but it doesn't always work. The kid spitting out the treats he got angers Magnus, making him want to turn the kid into a Roblox, but he can't because he doesn't have some magical amulet. Back at ELFS headquarters, it's revealed every theft has been written off as unsolvable by Gary. Wow, how was this not taken care of sooner? What happened to ELFS after the first movie? Carol finds Gary writing about hiding the Nutcracker evidence, and he lets it slip that Magnus was trapped as the Nutcracker. Noel, meanwhile, returns home and talks to Betty's head on a stick, which is indeed just as creepy as it sounds. And we finally get a glimpse of Betty in the real world, and she doesn't seem to be enjoying herself at all. Scott tries again to talk to Sandra about her problems, and she tries to make excuses. He acknowledges he's been spending more time with Buddy and thinks she's upset because he's having his son take over as Santa. He's also got a great line where, after he makes it clear he wants to help them both with their powers, he says there's no Christmas without her. She tries to walk off despite this, but he convinces her to stay and eat ice cream. Then she inadvertently, Ossios the spoon, forcing her to confide to her father that she thinks she's becoming a witch. She's surprised her father isn't mad, but he just acknowledges that their family isn't normal. They're all full of magic. Everyone is happy again, and then Carol shows up. Scott does tell her about Sandra being a witch, but Carol ultimately decides to just wait until Sandra comes to her. Carol then tells Scott about how Magnus Antis got turned into a Nutcracker, which Gary apparently sold on the black market to pay for his gambling debts. Again, just wow. How did this guy get left in charge for so long? Scott wonders if they should be worried, but Carol isn't sure. It's pretty clear they should be worried, however, as we cut to Olga making a weapon and Magnus raging about how people are acting. He's going to take back the North Pole and then make the whole world pay. Kind of disappointed it went that route instead of making Olga alone the villain, but I guess it's kind of understandable. Some people really do need to change their attitudes. So this wasn't the smoothest recording session, but that was episode 2 of season 2. I'm still kind of curious about where it's going to go, though I feel like this episode has some really disturbing implications as well. What did you all think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!